Most people assume infidelity begins with temptation, a sudden attraction, a moment of weakness. But psychology often reveals something different. Many affairs do not begin during stable periods of life. They begin during transitions, moments when life quietly shifts, a promotion, a move to a new city, the birth of a child, a career change, a midlife reflection. Even personal success can trigger it. When the structure of life changes, something deeper inside the mind begins to move as well. Understanding this pattern changes how we think about infidelity. It is not always about dissatisfaction with a partner. Sometimes it is about a person trying to understand who they are becoming. By the end of this exploration, you will understand why life transitions create emotional vulnerability, what happens in the brain during periods of change, and why new emotional connections sometimes appear exactly when someone's identity is shifting. Human beings are more psychologically stable when life feels predictable. Routines give the brain a sense of control. The mind knows what to expect tomorrow because today looks similar to yesterday. But life transitions interrupt that stability. A new job changes daily routines. A relocation disrupts familiar environments. Becoming a parent reshapes priorities and identity. Even positive transitions can create a subtle psychological disorientation. During these periods, the brain enters a temporary state of uncertainty. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as an identity adjustment phase. The mind begins asking quiet questions. Who am I in this new chapter? What does my life mean now? Am I becoming the person I imagined? These questions are rarely spoken out loud, but they influence behavior in powerful ways. Consider what happens when someone receives a promotion after years of hard work. On the surface, life looks successful, yet internally, they may feel pressure, self-doubt, or a sudden awareness that their role in the world has changed. The identity they carried for years no longer fits perfectly. Now pause and ask yourself something simple. When people feel uncertain about who they are becoming, what do they often search for? The answer is emotional confirmation. They look for signals that reassure them about their worth, their attractiveness, their relevance, or their identity. And when those signals appear in unexpected places, the brain pays very close attention. Life transitions often expose a psychological gap between the person someone was and the person they are becoming. Inside that gap, emotional curiosity can grow. For example, imagine someone who has spent years focused on responsibility and stability. During a transition, they suddenly encounter someone who sees a different side of them, someone who notices their creativity, humor, or ambition. That recognition can feel powerful. It's not just attention, it feels like rediscovery. The brain reacts strongly to experiences that reinforce identity. Dopamine rises when we feel validated. The reward system becomes active when someone reflects back a version of ourselves that feels exciting or new. This is where an unexpected emotional connection can begin. Not necessarily through physical attraction, but through conversation, shared perspective, a sense that someone sees parts of us that have been quiet for years. At first, the connection feels harmless, just an engaging conversation, a friendly exchange, a person who seems unusually interested in our thoughts. But emotional energy begins to move in subtle ways. Life transitions often create stress as well. Even positive change requires mental adjustment. The brain works harder to manage uncertainty, expectations, and new responsibilities. During these periods, emotional support becomes more valuable. If someone outside the primary relationship becomes the person who listens, encourages, or understands the new challenges, that emotional link can strengthen quickly. Here's a surprising insight. Affairs do not always begin with a search for romance. They often begin with a search for emotional clarity. People in transition are trying to make sense of their lives, and when someone else becomes part of that reflection process, the connection can feel unusually meaningful. Think about moments when you've gone through a major life shift, perhaps starting a new job, ending a chapter, entering a new phase of adulthood. Did your perspective on relationships, priorities, or identity change during that time? Transitions expand awareness. They make people reflect on what they have done with their lives and what they still want to experience. This reflection can awaken desires that were previously quiet. Sometimes those desires aren't about another person at all. They're about reclaiming lost parts of the self. Adventure, youthfulness, recognition, passion, freedom. But when another person becomes the mirror reflecting those feelings, emotional lines can begin to blur.
Another factor appears during transitions: novelty. The human brain responds strongly to new environments and new people. Novelty increases dopamine activity, which heightens curiosity and emotional intensity. In stable routines, relationships often settle into predictable patterns. That stability is healthy, but it can feel less stimulating compared to new interactions. During transitions, the brain is already primed for change. Meeting someone new in that mental state can amplify the emotional impact of the interaction. Suddenly, conversations feel more exciting, laughter feels more effortless, the connection feels alive. But the intensity is not only about the other person, it's about the psychological environment surrounding the interaction. The mind is already searching for meaning, identity, and validation. Now, consider another subtle dynamic. Life transitions can temporarily weaken emotional boundaries. When routines change, the structure that once guiding daily behavior disappears. New schedules, new environments, and new social circles create unfamiliar territory. In unfamiliar territory, people sometimes act in ways they would not normally consider, not because their values changed, but because their emotional state is different. Uncertainty makes the brain more sensitive to emotional stimulation. A kind message, an attentive conversation, or a shared vulnerability can feel amplified. Let me ask you something worth reflecting on. When someone feels deeply understood during a confusing period of life, how powerful does that connection become? Often more powerful than expected. Another psychological mechanism is what researchers call the fresh start effect. When people experience a life transition, they often feel an unconscious desire to reset parts of their identity. They want to become a slightly different version of themselves. Sometimes this means changing habits, pursuing new goals, or redefining relationships. But occasionally, it leads to exploring emotional possibilities that previously felt off-limits. The mind quietly asks, if life is changing anyway, what else could be different? This question does not always lead to infidelity, but it can create openness to emotional connections that might not have formed during stable periods. It's important to understand that these patterns are not excuses for harmful choices. They are explanations for why certain vulnerabilities appear at specific moments in life. When people recognize these psychological dynamics, they gain awareness, and awareness changes behavior. Instead of interpreting emotional curiosity as fate or destiny, it becomes possible to see it as a signal that identity is shifting, that emotional needs are changing, that reflection is necessary. Life transitions are powerful psychological crossroads. They invite growth, reinvention, and self-discovery, but they also create emotional turbulence that can influence decisions in unexpected ways. Healthy relationships often survive transitions when both partners remain curious about each other's evolving identities, because the person someone married years ago is not the exact same person today. Life experiences reshape priorities, ambitions, and emotional needs. The strongest relationships adapt to those changes rather than ignoring them. They create space for new conversations, new curiosity, and renewed emotional connection within the relationship itself. In many cases, what people seek during transitions is not a different partner, it's a different version of themselves. And when that version is discovered inside the existing relationship, the transition becomes an opportunity for growth rather than distance. The deeper insight here is simple but powerful. Infidelity during life transitions is often less about betrayal and more about identity confusion. People are navigating unfamiliar versions of themselves and searching for reassurance about who they are becoming. When that reassurance appears in the wrong place, emotional boundaries can weaken. But when awareness exists, those same transitions can strengthen self-understanding and deepen relationships instead of damaging them. Life will always change. Identities will evolve. That's part of being human. The question is whether we recognize the psychological forces shaping our choices during those moments. If these ideas made you reflect on how life transitions influence relationships, share your perspective in the comments. Many people discover that understanding human behavior helps them see their experiences in a new light. And if exploring the deeper psychology behind relationships and human decisions interests you, consider subscribing to continue learning about the hidden patterns that shape the way people think, connect, and grow.